there's something to be said about people being in solidarity with us and people being actually in resistance with us. And for you to be in resistance with us, you have to center the Palestinian resistance. You have to center the Palestinian narrative. That is going to be a difficult conversation to have. That is going to be an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's still the only conversation that matters.
Welcome to the Mondoweiss podcast. I'm your host, Dave Reed. We usually publish a new podcast every 2 weeks, but as events in Palestine continue to develop, we're bringing you this special episode in collaboration with the Groundings podcast and friend of the site, Devyn Springer. Devyn is a cultural worker, community organizer, and independent researcher. They are a member of the Walter Rodney Foundation and host of the Groundings podcast. They've written and worked with several media outlets, including Mondoweiss, and produced documentaries such as Parchman Prison, Pain and Protest. Today, Devyn and their co-hosts speak to Mohammed El-Kurd. Mohammed is a poet and writer from Jerusalem, Palestine. He lives in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, where the Israeli government is trying to forcibly remove his family and other Palestinian families so that Israeli settlers can take over their homes. Protests have been ongoing in Sheikh Jarrah over the last several weeks. Israeli forces escalated the violence by entering the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as the holy month of Ramadan came to an end, attacking tens of thousands of Muslim worshippers. Hamas, in Gaza, issued an ultimatum to Israel to withdraw its forces from Al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah, or it would launch rockets into Israeli-held territory. The Israeli government ignored the deadline and since late last week has carried out massive airstrikes against the civilian population in Gaza. As of this recording on Monday, May 17th, Israel has killed over 200 Palestinians in Gaza, including 61 children, and left over 1,400 injured. Visit the Mondoweiss website for ongoing coverage on this latest Israeli assault on Gaza.
Today we have a very special guest who I'm really excited to speak with, to learn from and ground with. Before we continue, I actually have a co-host with me today who is a friend and comrade of mine. I'm going to let him introduce himself before we begin the interview.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abu Shawadib. I'm a medical worker residing in the U.S., and I'm from a Palestinian background with family in East Jerusalem.
And without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest, Mohammed El-Kurd, a Palestinian organizer on the ground currently. Mohammed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed El-Kurd. I'm a writer and poet from the eastern part of occupied Jerusalem, Palestine. Pleasure to be here.
So first, I really just want to thank you for taking the time to sit down and speak with us. I know that you have been extremely busy and these are stressful and traumatic times for you. And so it really means a lot that you're taking the time to speak with me. I really want to make sure you understand that. And to begin, I thought we would begin with something that I haven't heard any other interviewers ask you is I'm wondering if you could actually describe the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. You know, what are your neighbors like? What memories do you hold in this neighborhood? Sort of tell me about this neighborhood.
Well, the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, the part of the neighborhood that's been making international news is the two-street compound that housed 28 families. And the way the neighborhood came about is through an agreement between the Jordanian government and the United Nations. And we were asked to build a garden in addition to living in our home and paying rent for 3 years. So I think one of the key characteristics of the neighborhood is the gardens that we have here. I think that's one thing that people are often surprised by how large these gardens are and how many different trees and fruits we have. I think another key point regarding what Sheikh Jarrah or why Sheikh Jarrah is so significant is because it's a Palestinian neighborhood, historically Palestinian. It's witnessed many battles against Zionist militias, and it's been surrounded by settlements and occupation forces since forever. And it's also surrounded by countless embassies and consulates all over and diplomatic offices here. In terms of memories, I don't know. Whenever I get asked this question, I often just kind of redirect and I say like everybody can imagine happy, warm memories in their homes, or almost everybody can imagine happy and warm memories in their home. I don't know. I don't have much memories. I don't know.
So I'd also like to hear a little bit about what the feeling is like on the streets currently. I know that there's also been an uptick in settler violence with recent events, and so I'm curious to hear a little bit about what you might have noticed in the day-to-day, but also the general feeling across Palestinians.
Definitely. I think there's two answers to this. First of all, there's a lot of anxiety, a heightened anxiety, because we've been living in this anxiety since the inception of Israel, but also since 1972 and since 2009. And we've had different stations of anxiety. And I think that it's been the most high because we've been witnessing a lot of settler state collusion, a lot of police violence, petty police violence, like sinister, vindictive police violence that makes you feel like there's like personal beef between you and the pigs. I think that's indication of what's been going on. For example, I teach in the States via Zoom, and I've had to interrupt so many of my classes because my yard was like blown up with stun grenades so many times, and I had to stop the class. But I will say that the feeling on the street is a feeling of defiance. For the first time in God knows when, there's unity across historic occupied Palestine and in the diaspora. And we are learning as Palestinians that these colonial fragmentations implemented by the Israeli occupation authorities, be it in Palestine 48 or inside the so-called West Bank or in the eastern part of Jerusalem, are all fake. They're all not real barriers. We're realizing that we're all a people despite the geography, and we're uprising everywhere. So the feeling of defiance, the feeling of pride is present. And I think that's the saving grace in the face of all of this brutality and in the face of all of the tear gas and the bullets and all of the martyrs and all of the anxiety. Yani sometimes we go to sleep. Some nights we go to sleep with our shoes on, with our like clothes on, because there'll be like Israeli special forces in the yard, and I'll like wake up and I'll see him like looking at me through the window. But at the same time, it's kind of gotten boring. Like I'll see them while I'm sleeping, and I'll just go back to sleep because it's just like annoying at this point. So it's both like a very highly dramatic level of violence, but I think the Palestinian people in general have kind of harbored a defiance, or what's the word, an indifference to this violence, which helps us. Sorry, I've rambled.
No, that's perfect. I feel like it's a kind of like a stale colonial violence that burdens the day-to-day of Palestinians. So I want this conversation to push past maybe the basics, and hopefully you won't feel the need or the burden to explain exactly what's happening in occupied Palestine, and instead focus more on the massive, dedicated, powerful resistance that we've seen from Palestinians all over historic Palestine and beyond. Resisting colonial violence looks a lot of ways. And I'm curious to hear from you, what are some of the ways or some of the main tactics taking place right now? Also, what tactics have you seen success in?
This is interesting. I mean, I'm a supporter of Palestinian resistance. I am a supporter of resistance of any subjugated people, period, without condition or categorization. I think for me personally, the front that single-handedly is most important is the media front right now. I think I've gone back and forth in determining this, but in speaking with so many of my friends, so many of my older friends who've lived through the first and second Intifada, we are truly living in, dare I say, an unprecedented time in terms of the shift in public opinion. And I think this is partly due to the so-called George Floyd uprisings last year, because I think Black people were like, fuck you, we're going to resist however way we want. So this has allowed, like, in the public arena, allowed for Palestinians to also say that. But I also think it's because the new generation, my generation, we are finally being unabashed. We're no longer like humanizing ourselves. We're no longer appealing to a Western audience. We're just pretty stubborn in our demands because they're rightful demands, and also because we're realizing like this is 73 years of bullshit that we're over. And I think that articulation that surpasses the pseudo quote unquote Palestinian leadership of the Palestinian Authority or other political parties that has been engulfed with respectability, with suppression, with watered down and sanitized language, just surpassing that and being able to speak however we want has certainly like carved a way for us, a place for us in the table. And I say this knowing that Israeli politicians are kicking and screaming, like they're terrified of losing the narrative. And I hate to sound cliche about like the narrative shifting, blah blah blah, but it's true. Like it's true. They are terrified of this ability to sort of articulate. And I think I was talking with my friend Sumaya, and there was like, I know that this is unprecedented, but I don't know how. And she said to me that oftentimes, or most of the time, all the time, when they speak about Palestinian, and when people are in solidarity with Palestinians, they often speak about human rights violations. This is kind of the first time that people are talking about this in the context of a settler colonialism. You have people like Viola Davis talking about Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine. This is huge, I think. And I know that these celebrities will not liberate Palestine, but it's indicative of something. And I think that articulation of settler colonialism, that context of settler colonialism, finally is allowing people to understand this, because this is presented as such a complex issue, when in reality, when you put it in, when you give it its name, it's super easy. And I think Sheikh Jarrah particularly is a microcosm of that, because you see all of the violent manifestations of settler colonialism in this one street, be it the police brutality or the ethnic cleansing or the apartheid or whatever. All of these manifestations of a settler colonial state are in Sheikh Jarrah. It's a small encapsulated microcosm of it. And when people are here, they are stunned. And then you give them the name, you give them the definition, and it all makes sense.
Exactly. And just one point that I've noticed myself is what might make this moment unprecedented is the fact that largely there's a media narrative which enshrouds all episodes of violence in the area. And it feels like this time, especially with your and other stories around Sheikh Jarrah, it feels like the narrative is not necessarily being shaped by a lot of the powerhouses that we're used to, and rather is coming from the streets.
I think that one thing that you said that resonated with me is sort of the protests around George Floyd. It's almost as if they blew the lid off of this thing, right? And when I interviewed Mumia Abu Jamal last year, he said that there's a convergence happening. You have the police killing people, you have COVID, you have outright literal colonialism and colonial violence taking place, and all these things are converging at once. And I think that convergence is something you can't go back from, right? Like the lid has been blown off. The colonizers and imperialists are struggling to get that lid back on, and it seems right now that they're failing. And Electronic Intifada reported this week that it appears there's massive uprisings sweeping across cities and villages across Palestine, as you kind of said, at almost an unprecedented level. But we also witnessed Palestinians from neighboring Jordan and neighboring areas sort of triumphantly, in my opinion, the videos, this very triumphant video, return in protest. What do you make of this, and what do you think the significance of this is?
No, because I want to say it's decolonization. I know it's super early to say this, but it's like, I think it's some kind of decolonization. Yani it's the first time you have Palestinians all across within, quote unquote Israel, that are uprising while people are getting carpet bombed in the Gaza Strip, while people are getting ethnically cleansed in occupied Jerusalem, while people are getting ethnically cleansed in the South Hebron Hills, while people are getting exiled and getting administrative detention. Oops, sorry. Let me turn that shit off 1 sec. Sorry, I can repeat my answer.
It's fine. It's all good. No worries.
What was the question? I'm so sorry.
I was just asking your thoughts about the return of so many Palestinians from Jordan who crossed over the border.
Oh, I think they're coming home. Yani, I think just as a person with family in Jordan who are like dying to come home, whose IDs been revoked by the occupation. I can only imagine the joy they felt running through the border, and I can only imagine the frustration they felt also, knowing that not only you have to deal with an occupier, you also have to deal with the army and the police of a kingdom, whose army is compromised of mainly Palestinians also, who is repressing you and not allowing you to leave, and like displaying force, not necessarily using force against you, but displaying their tanks and weapons and letting you know that, hey, should you cross that border, you will be repressed. So I think it's like beautiful and amazing and defiant, but I also think it's really sad that all of these neighboring countries, be it Lebanon or Jordan, and particularly Egypt, are all complicit in the Israeli colonial violence project that is taking place against Palestinians in here and Palestinian refugees. I don't know. I think it was like one of the most emotional things for me to watch people run across the border. It's I think this period of time, this moment, is also allowed us to be highly imaginative. I never in my life thought that liberation could be within our reach. And I don't know if I fully believe it yet, just because I've been so highly repressed and traumatized by the Zionist narrative here, and by living under an entity that is very powerful, but also peacocks its like powerfulness, that refuses to admit any defeats, that makes you feel like you're so small and minuscule. But I also think like, yeah, maybe liberation is within our reach. I don't know, like possibly like 10 years from now. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that the feeling right now throughout the entire colonized world is that the world feels shaky and uneven from what we've known, right? I think I'm looking at Haiti right now, where the entire island is on fire, and they're an uprising against a same system, a colonizer, imperialist-backed regime who's brutally oppressing them. So I don't think you're alone in that. This feeling of, is this the moment? Is it coming now? And to me, what's most important is whether it is or it's not, it's how we prepare and how we act in this moment that becomes the determining factor.
So just on the topic of facing a situation of colonialism where we have this false equivalency a lot of times painted, whether in the media or in conversation, and this argument attempts to pin a sort of neutral basis for the situation where it's a situation of conflict or a situation of violence kind of spread across both sides equally. But this narrative conveniently ignores that one side is a colonizer armed and sponsored by the most violent imperialist nation of all time. So what do you make of this argument's prevalence, and how come does it seem to come up every time Palestinian resistance has been mentioned?
I could say like all of the things like, Israel is a nuclear superpower. This is racist. They only want like, the indigenous people or these primitive people who are not allowed to be violent. And like, if violence comes from uniforms, then it's like fine. But even, here's my piece. I think the biggest issue with this is that for you to go to a journalism school and learn about journalism, you have to be objective. And I know that mainstream media pushes this narrative that you just said. It's like, this is neutral. This is our neutral way of reporting. This is our objective way of reporting. The reality is you are not being objective. You're being incredibly misleading. You're being dishonest. This is not objective. So I don't need journalists to be, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. I don't need journalists to go and change the world and be brave and, have ethics. I just need you to do your fucking job. It's in your job description to be objective. Look at this objectively. There's a side way stronger than the other side. There's a side that was here before. There's all of these asymmetries that you can easily point out and report them. You are just not doing your job. And I think, as I said earlier, like the media is the biggest, like after the material subjugation of the military occupation and colonialism here and the actual like cages we're living in, I think media is like the biggest enemy of the Palestinian people. And it has been the biggest enemy of any colonized people like across history. This is nothing new. This is the repeating of any media cycle within colonialism, that the indigenous people are portrayed as this way and are repressed and also are like seldom represented. And when they're represented in these characters that either give in to the power structures, either like sit with the colonizer, or they're represented with these like super fanatic, decontextualized characters. We don't have like representation. And it's not just, I'm not talking about like, symbolic representation. I'm talking about like the ability to self-articulate, the ability to speak about, narrate your own reality the way you see it on the ground and the way it is physically, tangibly, materially present in your life. We don't have this. And I think the media is not objective. It's deeply complicit. It has blood on its hands. Not only am I mad at like the New York Times for the way it's reporting on Gaza, I blame the New York Times for the massacres in Gaza. I blame all of these media outlets for what's happening because they take a situation. For example, I did a podcast with the Washington Post a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. And they edited out so much of what I said that if you heard me speak in the podcast, you'd think, oh, why are these people fighting over homes? But should they have kept the word occupation, the word colonialism, the word ethnic cleansing, the word U.S. registered organizations working in collaboration with the Israeli state to take over Palestinian homes in Sheikh Jarrah, then it would have made sense. But it's like, it's an industry of misinformation. I think my piece is that they're just unprofessional. Like if they were to do their jobs, this would be all solved. But maybe it's like super simplistic.
You began your answer with something I just want to highlight. You said journalists don't have to be brave and they don't have to be courageous and all this. They just have to do their jobs. And I think Palestinian American Steven Salaita, he has this piece on so-called fearless journalists who brand themselves as fearless. I want listeners to go check that out. It's a very great piece, exactly what you're talking about. And I just quickly wanted to quote something. DW News, which is Germany's biggest news source, they actually just put out new guides for their journalists to follow in talking about, quote, Israel-Palestine, as they call it. And it says, quote, "We never question Israel's right to exist as a state or allow people in our coverage to do so. We never refer to Israel as an apartheid regime. We also avoid referring to colonialism or colonialists." And I just want the listeners to kind of pause and sit with that for a second, that the German news source of all places is saying that they don't even want the words apartheid, colonialism, or colonialists to appear in their coverage. I just feel like that's extremely emblematic of so much of the media.
And so you spoke a bit about Palestinians narrativizing their own experience. You've had quite the media run yourself in the past few weeks, and you've called out Israeli settler colonialism and apartheid on international television. This is dangerous for you, as we've seen Israeli forces targeting individuals before. How has this impacted you? And have you ever had a moment where you felt the need to alter your response for your safety?
I don't know. I've always been like a very unabashed person, and I don't know, I'm very, it's not even unabashed. I think I just don't consider consequences of things just in general in my life. I'm very impulsive. So if I'm asked about something, I'm going to say whatever I think. And if I think this is a terrorist state, then I'm going to say it's a terrorist state. But then realizing the response, it kind of helped me connect the dots of like why this is so important for me to articulate. I don't think anything of what I say is like radical. I mean, I think it's radical in terms of public discourse, but I don't think it's radical because it's a complete reflection of the Palestinian street. My ideologies did not come from books or reading or being in lectures. My ideologies came from being a child of the street, of like living my entire childhood outside in Sheikh Jarrah in the street, from morning to night, talking to like people and journalists and weirdos, and learning about the world. And also just like when you live under these circumstances, you have no option but to speak out. I will say like, yes, Israeli occupation is like infamous for, if not assassinating, then incarcerating dissidents, and just the culture of fear they've implemented here. If I were to if I were to yell at a settler or a soldier and I would like cuss them, they would be like, "I'm going to take you now," and then they have the nerve to say this is a democratic country. So sometimes I will like sometimes I will fear for like my life or my loved one's life, but most of the time I'm just like so sick of living here, and I feel like that's being able to speak, being able to use my words to talk about my reality is like the only thing I have left. I think when I first started speaking about Palestine, I was like maybe 11 years old, and I went to like the European Parliament, and I thought I was doing something. And the journey between now and then is the fact that I have completely abandoned the politics of humanization. I've completely tried to convince people of like my worth as a human being, my ability to like go to school, and my ability to like have a father and have a mother and like have memories like normal people do. I stopped talking about how like our communities have women and children in them, as if like some communities don't. So I think that's like the big leap, was the fact that like I've decided 100% to stop trying to humanize myself, because I think the situation in Palestine is not an issue of ignorance. I think it's completely an issue of inaction.
And sort of a follow-up to that, because there's something that you recently said, I've heard yourself and many other Palestinians say is, people can't simply be interested in the Palestinian cause and supporting the Palestinian struggle when Palestinians can be made into these perfect victims. And when, you're fighting your oppression, but also that they should uplift and support Palestinian resistance and Palestinian life. I'm wondering if you could kind of expand on that a little bit more, because I feel the same way about Black struggle as well, that it can't always be sort of support when we become the perfect victims.
It says so much about like power dynamics in the world in general, and this is true about like victims of any kind of like violence, be it familial violence or like sexual violence or colonial violence. You are always the guilty party. You're always in the wrong, and you have to prove your innocence. Whereas people who uphold and right the systems that make you guilty are assumed innocent. This is true because in Palestine, in the Black struggle, I think, in other movements, people's solidarity with us stems from our subjugation. It stems from the fact that we are shot in the street. It stems from the fact that we are carpet bombed. It doesn't stem from the fact that we shouldn't be carpet bombed. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like there's no focus or emphasis on our colonizer or occupier's violence. It's the most of the focus on the pain that violence inflicts on us. And if that's your solidarity cycle, then it's non-sustainable, because if you don't address the colonizer, if you don't address the root of that violence, the violence is going to continue to happen because the colonizer is still there. So when you support Palestinian resistance, you are supporting the elimination of that colonizer. You are supporting the elimination of the perpetrator of violence. And when you do so, you have less victims, less hurting, less pain, less subjugation, and you have less solidarity to do. So it's like a win-win for you.
And we're almost done with our interview. I want to once again thank you for your time, of course.
Thank you. Thank you.
I did reach out to a few friends of mine, and one of my friends, Miriam, who's a Palestinian living in the U.S., she actually wanted to ask you a question. So I'm going to read her question. She asks, we know that Gili, which for those of you who don't know is a police exchange program where Georgia police are trained in apartheid Israel. We know from Gili that there are material links between anti-Black violence in the U.S. and settler colonial violence in Palestine. And we know from BDS that there are material links across our forms of resistance. What would you say to folks who feel overwhelmed or hopeless by the scale of these struggles, who say, oh, I'm just one person, what can I do?
I think there's intimate differences between like the Black movement for liberation and the Palestinian movement for liberation. That being said and respected, I think at the end of the day, everything is the same. Like a pig is a pig is a pig. And if you're able to like say no to police violence in the States, you should pretty easily say no to police violence here. Particularly like materially, speaking about Gili and other police exchanges and the $3.8 billion in military aid, the United States did not need Israel to teach it how to be racist. when I first found out of the police exchanges, I was like, oh, this is contributing to like the racial profiling, blah, blah, blah. But no, I think, American police is already like terrible, demonic. But it's a good link for people to recognize. And it's also like, I don't know, the question is about if these struggles are overwhelming for people. I think I completely understand. When I first came into like the Black resistance tradition and started learning about Black liberation, I thought it was overwhelming, or I thought it was big, but then it didn't take much for me to find it easily mirror my own reality and find ways that I could see. I don't know. I think the struggle for freedom is not an identitarian one. I think it's more of a struggle against violence, a struggle against subjugation. And once your understanding of that is, crystallized, it'll be very easy for you to identify the similarities between my struggle and yours and apply the same kind of pressure, the same kind of action that you apply to yours to mine. And that way we can build collective power. But I also don't know shit. I'm like 22. I don't know. You can ask somebody else that question. That was a really hard question. I don't fucking know.
I think Miriam's going to really like that response either way. So don't feel like you don't know anything.
Okay, great.
And just a parallel from what I've heard you speak on here recently, in terms of a mirrored experience, having seen the Black struggle in the U.S. and seen your experience as a Palestinian mirrored. I think this has also been the experience of folks who've been on delegations with people like myself to Palestine and occupied territories, where they've been able to see maybe in a fishbowl or in a totally alien environment their experience reflected to them. And so it's interesting to hear that that's been your experience in the U.S. There's a quote that I'm particularly fond of by Frantz Fanon. He famously wrote, "When we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe." How do you think that this has been at play for Palestinians, and especially in this most recent episode of violent disposition?
I've been talking to a lot of journalists in the past few months, and in the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they're always like, how do you feel that Sheikh Jarrah sparked the Gaza war? And I'm like, no, it didn't. What sparked the Gaza war, whatever you want to call it, is the fact that we are living under a military occupation that is brutal, is the fact that we are living constantly under the siege, under this violence. Like, what incentivizes me to resist and react and talk and articulate myself and say no to Israeli terrorism isn't because I think of myself as a freedom fighter. I don't think I've ever thought of myself as a freedom fighter. It's because I literally am sick of it. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it besides saying this. Like, I am sick and tired of living in here, of feeling such indignity every single time I step outside of my home. I'm sick of having my clothes torn off. I'm sick of being thrown and shoved. I'm sick of having a soldier look at my ID, see that I live here, and still not allow me to go in, and see that I have to sneak in and jump out over people's roofs while Israeli settlers can just walk in like it's their neighborhood. I'm sick of it, and that's why we speak out, like, because there's nothing else to do. And I think Palestinians also are recognizing. I think, at least for me, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Palestinians, but I'm recognizing that the Israeli occupation has created for us a hierarchy of oppression, meaning that so much of my life I spent silent because I thought, okay, they stole my home. It's not that big of a deal, in contrast to people who are getting fucking carpet bombed in the Gaza Strip, right? At least my oppression is tolerable. I think now I'm realizing that no, this is just red herring. It's not a real. It's to dilute me from being able to speak out against this. I don't care if a soldier shoved me in the street. That's unacceptable. It's as unacceptable as anything else. And being able to identify that is good. I think one of the most beautiful things about Palestinians is our stubbornness and resilience. But I think one of the most complicated things about us is our resilience, because for us, getting this kind of treatment, we raise our head high and we do the victory sign and we're smiling. And I think that's very beautiful. But we've also taught ourselves to think of these things as fine and okay and not hard and totally totally acceptable and fine. But if I were to put like a 22-year-old white American in my shoes, they would collapse. And whenever I think of that perspective, I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be living under the shit. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that was very well put. Finally, I guess I would ask you, how would you suggest the people listening to this help the Palestinians? I know this is a broad question and it's probably redundant at this point, but I just want to make sure the listeners can hear that. And then also, what can the people who not only care but feel moved to action do, not just in this moment, but sort of in the future and continually? And what does that look like?
This is a great question. I think, first of all, your allyship is beautiful. Thank you so much to whoever is listening. But I think you need to reevaluate the language in which you deal with this allyship. I would advise you to find the most radical Palestinian voice, most like extreme Palestinian voice, and align yourself with it. That's where your allyship should stem from. It shouldn't stem from a balanced perspective. It shouldn't stem from a neutral, sanitized perspective. You shouldn't be polite about this. I want people to burn tires, metaphorically and also literally. I think there's something to be said about people being in solidarity with us and people being actually in resistance with us. And for you to be in resistance with us, you have to center the Palestinian resistance. You have to center the Palestinian narrative. That is going to be a difficult conversation to have. That is going to be an uncomfortable conversation to have. But it's still the only conversation that matters. If your support for Palestinians does not stem from Palestinians' right to resistance against the fascist colonialism, then it's not good enough. How does that translate materially? It translates in do not police our language and engage in the language that we use. It translates into pressure your governments to place sanctions and also pressure your governments to stop being fascist within their own right, independently of Palestine. Most of these governments that we're asking for help for saving from Israeli occupation are fascist within their own right, are settler colonial governments within their own right, or apartheid government within their own right. So it's really important for you to liberate yourself. BDS is also a great starting point. And yeah, I think just like boycotts are incredibly, especially important regardless of where something is made. I'm not just talking about settlement products. I mean, all Israeli products you should boycott until something is done. Yeah, just take it, like think about your resistance, think about your solidarity with the Palestinians and take it up like 100,000 notches. I think that's what is needed.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you for your time. Abu, do you have any closing remarks at all?
No, thank you so much. I appreciate your resilience and your courage to speak on the experience of Palestinians here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to our show, a production of Mondoweiss.net. The music is from Sound of Picture. Visit our site to sign up for free daily and weekly newsletters on Palestine, Israel, and related U.S. politics. If you're enjoying our podcast, please consider becoming a donor by visiting Mondoweiss.net/donate. Mondoweiss is a nonprofit publication, and every donation of any amount helps sustain our work. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find our show.